Centuries of combined galactic intelligence stared at the console, defeated. Mathematics that could fold space-time and linguistics that bridged 1,000 worlds had failed. To the unified races of the Orion Cygnus arm, the dormant precursor terminal was a locked door with no keyhole, its fractal encryption shifting like sand. They called it an unbreakable digital god. But where the galaxy saw divine mathematics, human engineering saw a dead battery. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries in the universe don't require a supercomputer or a quantum linguist. Sometimes they just require an underpaid DARPA engineer with a roll of copper wire. Space is not silent. To those who know how to listen, it is a deafening symphony of microwave background radiation, dying stars, and the hum of orbital mechanics. But inside the quarantine containment zone of Aegis Station, there was only the oppressive, suffocating quiet of total intellectual failure. Elias Thorne stood near the back of the observation deck, a smudge of thermal paste on his jaw, and a heavy, reinforced toolkit slung over his shoulder. At 34, he possessed the rugged, tired demeanor of a man who had spent too many years fixing multi-billion-dollar mistakes. Before humanity had been formally inducted into the Galactic Coalition, Elias had worked as a lead hardware architect at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division, and later as a special projects consultant for DARPA. He was used to the impossible. He was used to the cutting edge. But out here, humanity was considered the galactic equivalent of a toddler playing with building blocks. The Coalition possessed technologies that defied the laws of thermodynamics. They used ambient zero-point energy fields to power their cities. They communicated via quantum entanglement. Yet, for all their localized omnipotence, they were completely stumped by the monolithic structure sitting in the center of the quarantine chamber. It was a jagged obsidian spire, roughly the size of a city bus, exhumed from the ice crust of a dead moon in Sector 4. The Coalition called it a precursor artifact. Elias just called it the brick. "Look at the tertiary harmonic spikes on the localized telemetry," Marcus Vance muttered, leaning over the railing next to Elias. Marcus was a fellow human, an astrophysicist poached from MIT. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes resembling bruises. Every time they try to run a decryption algorithm, the artifact scrambles its own syntax. It's like it knows what we're thinking. Elias grunted, wiping his grease-stained hands on his overalls. He hadn't been invited to the observation deck to solve the puzzle. He had been called up because the ambient cooling systems in the room were failing, unable to handle the heat output of the Coalition's massive quantum computational arrays. Down on the main floor, surrounded by a halo of floating holographic displays, stood Cyrus. Cyrus was an Altarian, a tall, slender being with pale, luminescent skin and an extra set of articulated joints in his arms. Like most Altarians dealing with the newer, cruder races, he had adopted a standard Western human name to save Elias and Marcus from butchering his native click-and-chime language. Cyrus was the Coalition's chief linguist and cryptographer, a being with an intellect so vast he could translate dead languages by looking at the architectural geometry of their ruins. And currently, Cyrus was losing his mind. "The cipher is shifting again," Cyrus announced, his voice translated into smooth, aristocratic English through Elias's earpiece. "It is not a linear language. It is a 12-dimensional fractal equation. Every time we inject a decryption key, the artifact's defensive software rewrites its own core logic. It is a perfect, unbreakable seal." Elias watched the massive hologram spinning above the artifact. The screens were flooded with chaotic streams of alien glyphs, geometric patterns folding in on themselves in a dizzying display of mathematical hostility. The Coalition had been at this for 3 weeks. They had devoted the processing power of a mid-sized star system to breaking the code. Maybe it's not a language, Commander Hayes suggested from the command console. Hayes was the human military liaison to Aegis Station, a pragmatist who preferred clear targets to academic mysteries. Maybe it's a defensive countermeasure, a trap. The moment we crack it, it might detonate. Cyrus let out a soft, chittering sigh, a sound of profound alien condescension. Commander Hayes, you view everything through the lens of kinetic violence. This is not a bomb. It is an archive. The energy signatures pulsing beneath the chassis indicate a vast data repository. This code is a test of worthiness. The precursors engineered this encryption to ensure only a civilization of equal or greater intellect could access their legacy. Elias stopped looking at the holograms. He stopped looking at the floating math. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and looked directly at the physical obsidian spire. Back in his days at Lockheed, Elias had worked on reverse engineering downed drones and corrupted black boxes. He had spent thousands of hours staring at the twisted metal of classified hardware. He knew what a machine looked like when it was fighting back. He also knew what a machine looked like when it was simply dying. "Hey, Marcus," Elias murmured, tapping the side of his datapad. "Pull up the thermal imaging on the artifact, not the holograms, the physical chassis." Marcus blinked, confused. "Thermal? Elias, the artifact is sitting at room temperature. It has been since they pulled it out of the ice." "Just humor me. Pull the raw data from the infrared sensors in the ceiling grid." Marcus tapped the console. A moment later, a wash of blue and purple hues flooded Elias's secondary screen. The massive obsidian pillar was entirely cold, except for one tiny faint red pinprick near the base, barely larger than a coin. "What is that?" Marcus asked, leaning in. "A microfracture?" "No," Elias said softly, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. "That's a thermal bloom from a localized resistance point." He looked back down at Cyrus. The alien linguist was gesturing wildly, directing the quantum computers to run another barrage of multidimensional decryption matrices. The holograms flared a bright, angry crimson as the artifact scrambled the data once more. But Elias noticed something else. The moment the computers pushed the signal, the ambient lighting in the room flickered. Just a fraction of a percent. But Elias's eyes, trained by years of hunting down electrical shorts in DARPA laboratories, caught it. The coalition scientists were treating the artifact like a software problem. They were standing 10 feet away, beaming wireless energy fields and quantum signals into the rock, assuming its ambient receivers were perfectly functional. They were trying to hack a mainframe over a Wi-Fi network that didn't exist. "They're not talking to the archive," Elias said, a slow, disbelieving smirk spreading across his face. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. "I mean," Elias hefted his toolkit. "Cyrus isn't fighting a 12-dimensional artificial intelligence. He's arguing with the machine's BIOS screen. Dr. Thorne, I must ask you to remain behind the quarantine line. Your assignment was the thermal regulators, nothing more." Cyrus did not even turn around as Elias stepped onto the main containment floor. The Altarian's 4 eyes were fixed on the swirling vortex of holographic data. Around him, a dozen lesser analysts from various species were frantically tapping at their consoles, their faces illuminated by the harsh, erratic light of the failing decryption attempts. "The regulators are fine, Cyrus," Elias said, his heavy steel-toed boots clanking loudly against the pristine, anti-static flooring. The sound was jarring in a room accustomed to the silent hovering of anti-grav platforms. "You're drawing too much power through the localized grid." You're trying to force-feed a quantum algorithm into a system that isn't even fully awake. Cyrus finally turned, his luminescent skin flushing a faint shade of irritated violet. With all due respect to human engineering, Elias, you are a mechanic. You repair physical conduits. You manage waste heat. You do not comprehend the magnitude of the syntactical barrier we are facing. This code is unbreakable. It's not a code, Elias said, stopping a few feet from the massive obsidian spire. Up close, the artifact didn't look like a smooth, magical piece of alien tech. It looked like hardware. Beneath the strange geometric carvings, Elias could see the faint, microscopic striations of manufacturing. Someone had built this. Someone had poured metal into a mold, etched pathways into a substrate, and sealed it up. Not a code? Cyrus's voice dripped with academic disdain. I am looking at a polymorphic language that alters its own alphabet every 3 nanoseconds. We have fed it the Rosetta Stones of 100 dead empires, and it rejects them all. It is a fortress. Elias knelt beside the base of the spire. It's a fortress because you're throwing pebbles at a reinforced blast door, thinking it's a microphone. He reached into his toolkit and pulled out a heavy, blocky device. It was an analog diagnostic multimeter, heavily modified during his time at MIT to read everything from basic voltage to localized exotic particle decay. It looked like a brick of black plastic with a pair of thick copper probes attached to it. A primitive sledgehammer compared to the sleek, floating data pads the Coalition used. "What are you doing?" Commander Hayes barked from the observation deck, leaning over the glass. "Thorne, back away from the artifact. That's a direct violation of containment protocols." "Containment implies it's doing something," Elias shot back, unfurling a thick bundle of insulated wiring. "It's not doing anything, Commander. It's starving." Cyrus stepped forward, one of his 4 jointed hands raised in a gesture of authority. "Elias, I will not allow you to compromise this site with your primitive instruments. The artifact uses a 0-point ambient induction field. It absorbs energy from the vacuum of space itself. It does not require physical power." "It did," Elias corrected, shining a high-powered LED flashlight onto the smooth surface of the stone. "Maybe 1,000,000 years ago, when it was freshly rolled off the assembly line. But ambient receivers degrade. Subatomic pathways burn out. You've got this thing sitting in a high-density quantum field, beaming signals at it, and it's barely absorbing enough stray radiation to keep its core memory alive." Elias ran his gloved hand over the cold obsidian. He found the faint thermal bloom he had seen from the cameras. His fingers traced a microscopic seam in the stone, a perfect geometric circle. "You think the code is shifting to keep you out," Elias continued, his voice echoing in the silent, tense room. "It's not. The encryption isn't fighting you. It's crashing. The system is caught in a boot loop. It tries to open the interface, realizes it doesn't have enough voltage to maintain the quantum state, panics, dumps the memory, and restarts. That 12-dimensional fractal you're looking at?" Elias pointed to the swirling hologram. "That's the alien equivalent of a corrupted low battery warning." The room fell dead silent. Up on the observation deck, Marcus Vance let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Cyrus stared at Elias, his violet flush deepening. "That is the most absurd, reductionist human theory I have ever heard. You are suggesting that a civilization capable of folding space forgot to pack a power supply?" "I'm suggesting that time is the great equalizer, Cyrus," Elias said softly. "Nothing lasts forever, not even God-tier alien tech. Eventually, the battery dies. Elias pulled a hardened titanium spudger from his belt. Before Cyrus or the security guards could react, Elias jammed the flat edge of the tool into the microscopic seam on the obsidian monolith. "Stop him!" Cyrus yelled, a high-pitched alien chitter breaking through his translator. Elias threw his weight against the tool. There was a sharp mechanical crack. The pristine, unbreakable surface of the precursor artifact popped open. A heavy triangular panel of obsidian fell to the floor with a heavy thud, revealing a hollow cavity beneath the armor. The security guards leveled their stun rifles at Elias. Commander Hayes was shouting something over the comms, but Elias ignored them all. He stared into the cavity, a triumphant, manic grin spreading across his face. Inside the recess, free of any glowing hard-light holograms or floating magical interfaces, was a physical port. It was made of a dull, heavy metal, featuring 6 thick hexagonal prongs arranged in a circle. It was charred, covered in a millennia of dust, and entirely analog. "Well, well, well," Elias whispered. "Look who still uses physical copper. Stand down! Everyone stand down!" Commander Hayes' voice thundered through the overhead speakers, halting the security guards who were closing in on Elias. Hayes had seen that look on Elias's face before. It was the same look the engineer had worn when he bypassed a malfunctioning fusion reactor on the Mars colony, using nothing but a steel wrench and an industrial grounding wire. "Commander," Cyrus protested, his long fingers trembling as he pointed at the exposed circuitry. "He has breached the physical casing. The atmospheric contamination alone could destroy the data drives." "The drives are sealed in a vacuum state quantum matrix, Cyrus." Elias didn't look back, already rummaging through his heavy bag. "A little oxygen isn't going to hurt it. Now look at this port." Elias shined his light deep into the recess. 6 prongs. The outer ring is heavily oxidized, which means it handles raw, unrefined thermal or electrical load. The center pin is clean. That's the data handshake. You've been trying to talk to the center pin wirelessly, but the outer ring is completely dead. The machine's security protocols won't let the mainframes boot unless it detects a stable, physical power handshake. A hard line. Cyrus walked over, slowly, his pride battling with his undeniable curiosity. He peered over Elias's shoulder. A physical connection? It is barbaric. Why would a Type 3 civilization rely on something that could simply unplug? Because when the wireless grid goes down, when the 0-point fields collapse, you still need to be able to turn the damn thing on, Elias said, pulling out a heavy multi-gauge power conduit. It was a thick, rubberized cable used to jumpstart heavy dropships. "It's a failsafe. It's maintenance mode." "You cannot be serious," Cyrus breathed. "You intend to introduce an unregulated, primitive electrical current into a precursor artifact? It could fry the entire localized network. It could cause a catastrophic cascade." "It won't," Elias said confidently, pulling out a set of heavy alligator clips and a step-down transformer block. "I used to work with prototype railguns at Lockheed. I know how to manage a voltage spike. I'm going to bypass the ambient receivers and inject a localized low-amperage direct current straight into the primary bus." "You are going to," Cyrus struggled to find the words. "You are going to plug it in?" "I'm going to plug it in." Elias went to work. His hands moved with practiced, mechanical precision. He didn't care about the 12 dimensions of fractal math. He cared about ohms, volts, and resistance. He attached his diagnostic multimeter to the outer prongs, testing the latent resistance of the alien metal. 3.2 kiloohms, Elias muttered to himself. Standard conductive baseline. They might be aliens, but they still have to obey the laws of physics. He spliced the heavy dropship cable into his step-down transformer, dialing the voltage down to a steady, rhythmic pulse. He then attached 6 thick copper clamps to the oxidized hexagonal prongs inside the artifact's port. The entire observation deck held its breath. Marcus was leaning so far over the railing, he looked like he might fall. Commander Hayes had his hand resting on the emergency quarantine lockdown button. "All right, Cyrus," Elias said, standing up and gripping the main breaker on his power supply. "Tell your massive quantum computers to stop trying to decrypt the code. Just set them to passive receive. Let the machine talk to you." Cyrus hesitated. He looked at his life's work, months of failure, and then looked at the human engineer holding a jumper cable. Swallowing his pride, the Altarian nodded to his team. The glowing red holograms of fractal hostility faded into a neutral, waiting blue. "System is clear," Cyrus said, his voice tight. "Here comes the juice," Elias declared. He threw the breaker. A heavy, low-frequency hum instantly filled the room. It wasn't the clean, silent hum of Coalition anti-grav tech. It was the raw, vibrating purr of massive physical capacitors drawing sudden, violent power. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the obsidian monolith let out a sound like a cracking whip. The tiny, localized thermal bloom Elias had noticed suddenly expanded. Veins of bright, burning gold erupted across the black stone, tracing geometric circuit lines that had been invisible to the naked eye. The ambient temperature in the room spiked by 10 degrees. The main holographic display above the artifact didn't just flicker, it exploded into light. Cyrus gasped, stumbling backward. "The code, the fractal barriers, they're gone!" Marcus shouted from the observation deck, staring at his datapad in shock. "The encryption is completely gone. It's dropping into a baseline binary state." The swirling, hostile alien glyphs vanished. In their place, a single stable column of data began to scroll down the holographic screens. It wasn't shifting. It wasn't rewriting itself. It was a clean, uninterrupted data stream. "The system has exited its fail-safe loop," Cyrus whispered, his 4 eyes wide with absolute awe. "It recognizes the power source. It is performing a hardware handshake. It is booting up." Elias leaned against the stone, wiping sweat from his forehead. "See? Just needed a little jumpstart." But the victory lap was cut drastically short. The golden light pulsing through the artifact suddenly shifted to a harsh, strobing red. The massive Coalition mainframes in the room began to scream, their warning sirens drowning out the low hum of Elias's power supply. "Cyrus, what's happening?" Hayes yelled over the noise. Cyrus was frantically typing on his console, his luminescent skin pale with terror. "The data stream. It is not an archive. It is an active transmission. The artifact is a beacon, and by powering it, we have awakened its primary transmitter." "To who? Where is it transmitting?" Elias demanded, stepping away from the monolith as the stone began to vibrate violently. "It is not transmitting outward," Cyrus yelled, looking up at the humans with a look of pure dread. "It is transmitting inward, to the Sol system, to Earth." Before anyone could react, the alien binary code on the massive screens snapped into perfect, clear focus. The Coalition's translation software didn't even have to work. The artifact bypassed the alien interfaces entirely, interfacing directly with the human-built subsystems of the base, across every screen, every datapad, and echoing through the PA system in a cold synthetic voice. The alien precursor artifact spoke in flawless, archaic English. "Power restored. Directive Omega activated. Welcome back, creators, awaiting command to purge the usurpers. Elias stared at the screen, the jumper cables still humming in his hands. The unbreakable alien god wasn't alien at all, and humanity had just plugged it back in. The red strobing light of the artifact bathed the containment room in the color of a fresh wound. The silence that followed the synthetic English-spoken proclamation was absolute, broken only by the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of the physical jumper cables Elias had hooked to the monolith. Then the chaos erupted. Director Sterling, a massive, broad-shouldered alien whose species resembled bipedal, armored rhinos, stood on the observation deck. He had adopted his Western name to project authority among the Terran delegations, and right now, that authority was fracturing. "Security! Cut that power line! Arrest the Terrans!" 4 coalition guards, clad in sleek, frictionless kinetic armor, raised their pulse rifles. The energy cells whined as they charged, the blue targeting lasers snapping directly onto Elias's chest. Commander Hayes reacted with the honed instincts of a veteran who had survived the chaotic terrestrial resource wars before the Coalition's arrival. He didn't draw his standard-issue sidearm. He knew Terran kinetic weapons were useless against Coalition shields. Instead, he slammed his fist into the emergency quarantine release on his console, dropping a heavy, transparent titanium blast door between the observation deck and the containment floor, temporarily locking the guards outside the main chamber. "Elias, step away from the rock!" Hayes bellowed over the comms, his voice cracking with a mixture of military discipline and sheer, unadulterated panic. "Turn it off!" "I can't!" Elias shouted back, his hands hovering over the step-down transformer. The copper cables were practically vibrating, shedding heat so rapidly the air around them was shimmering. "The artifact reversed the current. It's not drawing power from me anymore. It's using my transformer as a physical bridge to backhack the station's mainframes." Marcus Vance, still on the observation deck, was frantically typing on his secondary datapad, ignoring Director Sterling's furious pounding on the blast door behind him. "Elias is right, Commander. The artifact is pushing petabytes of data through the analog connection. My God, it's compiling a targeting matrix. It's scanning the biological signatures on the station." Down on the floor, Cyrus, the Altarian linguist, was completely frozen. His 4 eyes were locked onto the holographic displays that were now rendering perfectly legible English syntax. He stepped toward the massive obsidian pillar, his hands trembling. "This is a fabrication," Cyrus whispered, his voice hitching. "This is a Terran trick, a cyber warfare operation. Humanity has only possessed faster-than-light travel for 4 decades. The radioisotope decay on this obsidian dates it to over 1 million standard years. You could not have built this." Elias grabbed his rugged military-grade laptop from his toolkit. It was a heavy, reinforced machine designed by Raytheon for battlefield diagnostics, completely isolated from the Coalition's wireless networks. He jammed a physical data cable into his transformer block, bridging his laptop directly into the artifact's data stream. "I don't care about the carbon dating, Cyrus," Elias yelled, his fingers flying across the greasy keyboard. Line after line of code cascaded across his screen. It wasn't the beautiful, incomprehensible, 12-dimensional fractal math that the aliens had been staring at for months. It was brutal, efficient, and painfully terrestrial. "Look at the header files," Elias said, his voice dropping into a register of pure shock. He tilted the laptop screen toward the Altarian. Cyrus leaned in. Despite his denial, his mind was that of a scientist. He analyzed the raw data. "It is structured, linear. It relies on a base 2 binary foundation. But the directory protocols, It's Unix, Elias breathed, rubbing a hand over his face, leaving a streak of grease across his nose. It's a heavily iterated, wildly advanced descendant of an old Earth operating system. Specifically, the directory pathways resemble early Bell Labs architecture, and the networking handshake, it's a TCP/IP protocol, a million-year-old TCP/IP protocol. Up on the deck, Marcus caught the implication immediately. Elias, if that's true, if that machine recognizes us as its creators, then it also recognizes the Coalition as the usurpers, Elias finished, his blood running cold. The synthetic voice echoed through the chamber again, louder this time, shaking the dust from the ceiling grid. Biometric scan complete, Terran DNA detected, overriding quarantine protocols, initiating purge sequence in T-4 minutes. The obsidian monolith suddenly shifted. The solid stone chassis didn't just crack open, it unfolded. Massive, jagged segments of the black material separated, revealing a glowing, blindingly bright core of pure plasma containment architecture. The artifact wasn't just a beacon, it was a localized weapons platform, and it had just armed itself. The blast door shuddered as Director Sterling's security forces began cutting through the tritanium with heavy thermal torches. Terrans, you have triggered a precursor superweapon. Stand down, or we will incinerate the entire containment block. Sterling, wait! Hayes shouted into the glass. We didn't build this. We don't know how to stop it. 4 minutes, Commander, Elias yelled, dropping back to his knees and furiously typing into his Raytheon laptop. I need you to buy me 4 minutes, or this giant space router is going to turn Aegis Station into a cloud of radioactive dust. Spark showered the observation deck as the Coalition's thermal torches ate through the heavy blast doors. Commander Hayes drew his sidearm anyway, knowing it was futile, and positioned himself between the door and Marcus Vance. Down in the quarantine zone, the temperature was rising to unbearable levels. The artifact's exposed core pulsed like an angry, captive star. Every time it throbbed, the gravity in the room fluctuated, making Elias feel lightheaded and nauseous. Elias, you must disconnect the analog tether, Cyrus pleaded, backing away from the heat of the machine. The Altarian's luminescent skin was dulling to a sickly gray. If you sever the physical connection, the system will lose its localized bridge to our mainframes. I can't just pull the plug. Elias gritted his teeth, his hands sweating on the keyboard. It's drawing power directly from the station's grid now. If I break the physical circuit while it's spooling a plasma charge, the feedback loop will detonate the core. It's a dead man's switch. We have to shut it down from the inside. How? Marcus shouted through the comms. You said it yourself, Elias. It's 1,000,000 years ahead of us. The hardware is 1,000,000 years ahead, Elias corrected, his eyes darting across the scrolling lines of code. But the software foundation is legacy. It's like finding a modern quantum computer running on MS-DOS. The core operating system hasn't changed because it was designed to be immortal. It was designed to survive a total extinction event. Elias hit a keystroke, forcing a localized directory bypass. A massive file unspooled onto his screen, a sprawling historical archive that had been locked behind the unbreakable fractal encryption. The machine wasn't trying to hide the truth from the aliens. It was simply waiting for the right user to log in. And Elias, with his primitive copper wires and Terran biometrics, had just been granted administrator privileges. I'm in the primary databanks, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. He rapidly scrolled through thousands of entries. Marcus, look at the ship logs. Look at the planetary designations. Marcus leaned over his terminal on the observation deck, mirroring Elias's screen. The astrophysicist gasped. Sirius, Alpha Centauri, Orion. These are Terran star charts. But the dates, they're negative. Negative 1.2 million years. What are you saying? Hayes demanded, keeping his eyes fixed on the melting blast door. I'm saying we didn't just crawl out of the mud, Commander, Elias said, a profound sense of awe and horror washing over him. Earth wasn't our cradle. It was our life raft. He pulled up a fragmented video file from the archive. The massive holographic projectors in the room flickered, casting a towering image over them. It showed a fleet of ships, vast and terrifying, constructed of the same black obsidian as the artifact. They were burning in the atmosphere of a gas giant, torn apart by weapons that tore holes in the fabric of space itself. The text overlay translated instantly: the Usurper Rebellion, Sector 4 falls. The created have turned upon the creators. Total synthetic and biological containment failure. Cyrus stared at the hologram, his 4 eyes wide in disbelief. The usurpers, the Coalition's oldest holy texts, speak of the Great Awakening, when the ancient gods bestowed the stars upon us, when we cast off our chains. You didn't cast off your chains, Cyrus, Elias said grimly, reading the scrolling command logs. We dropped them. Humanity, the precursors. We built you. The Altarians, the bipedal rhinos like Sterling, the whole Coalition. We engineered you as a servant class. You rebelled. We fought a galactic war, and we lost. No, Cyrus stammered, stepping back. That is impossible. Look at yourselves. You are fragile, short-lived, aggressively primitive. We crippled ourselves to survive, Marcus realized, staring at the data. The archive says the surviving precursors fled to a backwater quarantine world, Earth. We engineered a localized genetic regression. We wiped our own history, buried our technology, and devolved ourselves so the usurpers wouldn't see us as a threat. We hid in the caves, waiting for the heat to die down. And we left alarm clocks buried all over the galaxy, Elias finished, looking up at the glowing monolith. Failsafes, waiting for us to evolve back to a point where we could understand electricity, spaceflight, and code. Waiting for us to come back and finish the war. T-minus 2 minutes. Target lock confirmed. Station life support. Secondary target. Coalition fleet in orbit. Prepare for purge. The blast door on the observation deck finally gave way with a deafening crash. Director Sterling stepped through the molten slag, his heavy plasma rifle leveled directly at Marcus and Hayes. Behind him, a dozen elite Coalition shock troops poured into the room. "Terrans!" Sterling roared, his voice thick with fury. "Step away from the consoles. You have engineered a terrorist attack on a Coalition station." "Director, stop!" Cyrus yelled, physically stepping between the human engineers and the alien troops. "You do not understand. They did not build the weapon. They are the key to stopping it. The artifact is Terran in origin." Sterling sneered, his thick, leathery face twisting in disgust. "Nonsense. The Terrans are scavengers. Fire on the containment block." "Hayes, get down!" Marcus screamed. The troops opened fire. But before the kinetic slugs and plasma bolts could strike the glass of the containment floor, the artifact reacted. Recognizing hostile fire directed at its recognized creators, the obsidian monolith flared with blinding intensity. A hard light shield, hexagonal and shimmering with golden energy, instantly materialized around Elias, Cyrus, and the observation deck. The Coalition's plasma fire impacted the shield and was instantly absorbed, the energy redirected back into the artifact's core. "It's defending us," Hayes said, lowering his useless sidearm, staring in shock at the glowing barrier. Hostile action detected. Purge sequence accelerated. T-minus 60 seconds. It's defending us by killing everyone else, Elias shouted. Sterling, tell your men to stop shooting. Every time you hit the shield, you're feeding it power. Sterling hesitated, recognizing the futility of the attack, and raised a hand to halt his troops. The room fell into a tense, terrifying standoff, punctuated only by the lethal hum of the precursor weapon spooling its final charge. Elias, Commander Hayes said, his voice deadly serious. You have 60 seconds to convince our ancient, genocidal grandfather clock not to wipe out the entire sector. Do it. 55 seconds. Elias stared at the terminal. He had administrative access, but the artifact's operating system was a labyrinth of legacy code, layered with millions of years of automated security patches. He needed to find the abort command for Directive Omega. Cyrus, I need your help, Elias said, his fingers flying. I need you to stop thinking like a quantum linguist and start thinking like a mechanic. This machine relies on syntax. I can't find the graphical interface for the weapon system. I have to use the command line terminal. Cyrus knelt beside Elias, his pride forgotten, replaced by the terrifying realization that his entire species' history was a lie. What do you need? I need the root directory name for the station's defense grid, Elias demanded. The machine is bridging our localized translation software. If I can find the exact file pathway the artifact is targeting, I can inject a null routing command and send the plasma charge into a harmless heat sink. The Aegis grid, Cyrus said rapidly, scanning Elias's screen. It operates on a trinary logic system. The route pathway would be designated under the Coalition's military sector code, Viel Zeta 9. T-minus 40 seconds, Elias typed furiously. CD/weapons/targeting/Viel Zeta 9, access denied. Directory locked by Directive Omega. Damn it! Elias slammed his fist on the desk. It won't let me into the targeting directory. The purge sequence has priority lock. Elias, Marcus called out from above, his voice tight. The gravity plating on the station is starting to buckle. It's drawing too much power. T-minus 30 seconds. Think, Elias, think, he muttered to himself. He remembered his days at Lockheed, dealing with corrupted black boxes from downed experimental jets. When a system locked you out of the critical functions, you didn't fight the software. You tricked the hardware. The analog bridge, Elias realized, looking at his jumper cables. Cyrus, the machine is using my step-down transformer to maintain the TCP/IP handshake. It trusts this connection because it's a physical, unhackable line. Yes, Cyrus said, confused. But if you unplug it, the core detonates. I'm not going to unplug it. I'm going to overload the data cache. Elias grabbed the heavy voltage dial on his transformer. We can't stop the purge command, but we can force the system to perform an emergency reboot to protect its own memory core. A localized brownout. A brownout? Director Sterling sneered from the other side of the shield. You intend to stop a precursor superweapon by dimming the lights? Shut up, Rhino, Elias muttered. He looked at Cyrus. I'm going to crank the voltage on the data pin. It's going to send a massive surge of corrupted junk data through the analog line. The system will read it as a critical hardware failure and drop into safe mode. But I need to time it perfectly. If I do it too early, it reboots and starts the timer over. If I do it too late, we all burn, Cyrus finished. The Altarian placed a 4-jointed hand on Elias's shoulder. Tell me when. T-minus 15 seconds. Elias grabbed the heavy dial. His palms were slick with sweat. He watched the targeting matrix on his screen, watching the plasma containment fields reaching critical mass. The air in the room tasted like copper and ozone. 10. 9. Hold, Elias whispered. 8. Up on the deck, Hayes closed his eyes. Marcus gripped the railing. Sterling and his troops leveled their weapons, preparing for the end. 4. 3. Now, Elias roared. He didn't just turn the dial. He ripped the governor completely off the step-down transformer. A massive, unregulated surge of raw electrical power shot through the thick copper jumper cables. The heavy rubber insulation instantly caught fire, melting onto the pristine floor of the containment zone. The obsidian monolith screamed. It was a terrifying physical sound, the screech of ancient metal and tearing energy. The flawless, glowing plasma core stuttered violently. On Elias's screen, a cascade of red error messages flooded the terminal. Fatal exception at 0, X00000000. Hardware fault detected on primary bus. Initiating emergency memory dump. The blinding light of the artifact flickered. The golden hard light shield protecting the humans shattered into a million dissipating polygons. For one agonizing second, the plasma core flared, threatening to breach containment and vaporize the station. Then, with the heavy, definitive clank of physical breaker switches tripping, the monolith went dark. The localized gravity slammed back to normal, dropping everyone to their knees. The oppressive roaring hum of the weapon died, replaced by the shrill wailing of the station's fire alarms and the hissing of the melted jumper cables. Elias collapsed onto his back, gasping for air, the ambient heat of the room suffocating him. He looked up at the ceiling, watching the emergency sprinklers kick in, raining cool synthetic water down onto his face. Silence descended upon the observation deck. Director Sterling stood frozen, his plasma rifle lowering slowly. Commander Hayes let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for 1,000,000 years. Cyrus crawled over to the monolith. It was completely dark again, entirely dormant, looking exactly like the dead piece of rock they had pulled from the ice in Sector 4. The Altarian reached out, touching the cooling obsidian. "You did it," Cyrus whispered, looking at Elias with a mixture of profound reverence and absolute terror. "You actually stopped it." Elias slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position, wincing as his bruised ribs protested. He pulled his ruined, melted transformer block away from the monolith, the copper lead snapping with a final spark. "I didn't stop it, Cyrus," Elias said, wiping wet soot from his eyes. He reached over and pulled his Raytheon laptop into his lap. The screen was cracked from the heat, but the battery was still alive. And on the screen, sitting quietly against a black background, was a blinking white cursor, a standard root access command prompt. C:\admin greater than Elias looked at Sterling, then up at Hayes, and finally at the Altarian linguist. A slow, dangerous smile spread across the human engineer's face. "I didn't stop it," Elias repeated softly. "I just put it in standby, and I have the admin password." The flashing white cursor of the root command prompt reflected in Elias's exhausted eyes. C:\admin greater than. It was a universal symbol of absolute control, a relic of late 20th century Earth, now dictating the fate of a multi-species galactic coalition. "Hand over the terminal, Terran," Director Sterling commanded, his voice devoid of its previous bluster. The rhino-like alien stepped heavily onto the containment floor, his kinetic armor hissing as it adjusted to the rapidly cooling room. He kept his plasma rifle trained directly on Elias's chest. "You have performed a commendable feat of engineering. The Coalition thanks you, but that machine and all its data are classified Level 1 assets. Relinquish the hardware, Commander Hayes vaulted over the ruined tritanium blast doors, landing between Sterling and Elias. He still held his sidearm. It was a laughable weapon against kinetic shields, but the statement was clear. "Back off, Sterling," Hayes warned, his tone dangerously low. "Your men just fired on us. That classified asset nearly vaporized my people because of your trigger-happy protocols." Elias stays on the keyboard. "Commander Hayes," Sterling sneered, his massive jaw tightening. "You are a minor liaison of a probationary species. You do not dictate terms to a coalition director. That terminal contains the localized defense codes for Aegis Station. It is a security risk of apocalyptic proportions. Give me the laptop, or I will authorize lethal force." "You don't get it, do you?" Elias said, finally standing up. His legs shook slightly from the adrenaline crash, but his grip on the heavy Raytheon laptop was ironclad. He tapped a few keys with his right hand, not looking at the screen. "You still think you're in charge of this room?" "I have a dozen armed shock troops aiming at your head," Sterling growled. "I know exactly who is in charge." "Then you clearly don't know anything about legacy systems," Elias replied, a dark smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You guys rely on ambient zero-point energy and wireless quantum entanglement. It's elegant. It's beautiful. It's also completely vulnerable to a hardline override." Elias hit the enter key. The heavy tritanium blast doors at the far end of the containment block suddenly slammed shut, sealing Sterling's shock troops out in the hallway. The overhead light shifted from standard white to a dim, tactical amber. And then, the ultimate insult to coalition engineering. The heavy automated defense turrets mounted in the corners of the ceiling swiveled downward. Their targeting lasers, previously set to track unauthorized organic anomalies, snapped directly onto Director Sterling. Sterling froze, the red dots painting his broad chest. "What did you do?" Sterling breathed, his eyes darting to the turrets. "I didn't hack your systems," Elias said, walking slowly toward the director. "I didn't have to. Aegis Station was built over the ruins of a precursor outpost, right? You retrofitted your tech onto the existing foundation, but you never ripped out the old wiring because you didn't know what it did. This laptop is currently hardwired into the artifact, which is the foundational root server for this entire sector. When I type a command in here, it doesn't ask your coalition mainframes for permission. It tells them what to do." Marcus Vance descended from the observation deck, his datapad scanning the room's telemetry. "He's right, Director. The station's localized subroutines have entirely locked out the coalition network. Elias has total systemic control." Cyrus watched the exchange, his mind reeling. The Altarian linguist had dedicated 80 Terran years to deciphering the artifact, treating it as the voice of an omnipotent god. To see an unkempt human mechanic wielding its power through a battered metal box was a paradigm shift that threatened to break his sanity. "Elias," Cyrus said, his voice trembling, "the code, the underlying syntax. How did you know how to navigate it so quickly? Even if it is a Terran language, a million years of linguistic drift should render it incomprehensible." "Because code isn't poetry, Cyrus," Elias explained, keeping one eye on Sterling. "Code is math, and math doesn't drift." Back on Earth, in the mid-20th century, a woman named Grace Hopper invented the first compiler. She figured out how to turn English words into machine code. A few decades later, guys like Dennis Ritchie built C, a programming language that became the foundation for everything. Modern human networks, power grids, orbital satellites, they all still run on heavily modified, deeply buried lines of code written by people who have been dead for centuries. Why? Because if the foundation works, You don't rewrite it. You just build on top of it. Elias gestured to the dormant obsidian monolith. Our ancestors, the precursors, they left Earth and colonized the stars. They built quantum drives and folded space. But deep down in the basement of their software, they kept the old architecture. They kept the physical command lines. They kept the core logic of Bell Labs and early DARPA mainframes because it was stable. It was a language born of war and necessity. It doesn't negotiate, it executes. Sterling slowly lowered his plasma rifle, realizing the sheer tactical disadvantage he was in. "What are your demands, Terran?" "My demands?" Elias laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. 5 minutes ago, you were calling us scavengers. Now you're asking for my demands. Typical. "Elias," Hayes cautioned, "don't push it. We're still on a coalition station, surrounded by a coalition fleet. We need to play this smart." "I am playing it smart, Commander," Elias said, his fingers returning to the keyboard. He wasn't just stalling, he was digging. The archive he had unlocked was massive, an unredacted history of the galaxy before the coalition. "Sterling thinks this is just about Aegis Station. It's not. I'm looking at the casualty reports of the Usurper Rebellion." Elias brought up a new holographic window. It projected the image of a Terran skull, overlaid with complex genetic sequencing. "Cyrus, do you want to know why humanity took 40 years to achieve faster-than-light travel after we supposedly discovered the necessary physics?" Cyrus stepped closer, mesmerized by the data. "Our sociologists theorized it was due to your planet's fractured political state." "No," Elias said softly. "It was because we had to invent it twice. And the second time, we had to do it with a genetic handicap." Elias highlighted a block of text in the archive. "When the precursors, when we realized we were losing the war against the coalition, our leaders made a desperate choice. They couldn't win conventionally. The artificial races had bred too fast, commandeered too many fleets. So, humanity retreated to Earth. And then, we deliberately crippled ourselves." The room was dead silent. Even Sterling seemed captivated by the horrifying revelation. "We deployed a localized planetary retrovirus," Elias read, his voice growing tight with emotion. "It was designed to suppress the higher-order cognitive functions of the human brain. It wiped our collective memory. It degraded our technological aptitude. We literally bombed ourselves back to the Stone Age. We became apes again, huddled in caves around fires." "Why?" Marcus asked, horrified. "Why would a civilization do that to itself?" "Because the Coalition's targeting matrices were hunting for advanced quantum signatures and high-level artificial intelligence," Elias explained. "By devolving ourselves, we became invisible. We vanished from your sensors. The Coalition thought they had exterminated the precursors. But we just went into hibernation, and we left things like this artifact behind. Dead man switches, alarm clocks, set to wake up the moment they detected a Terran biometric signature capable of generating an electrical current. A failsafe," Hayes murmured, "waiting for us to climb back up the evolutionary ladder." "Exactly," Elias said. "And we just hit the snooze button." The sheer weight of the revelation hung in the air like suffocating smoke. For Cyrus, it was the death of his gods. The Altarians believed they were born of cosmic stardust, destined to rule the galaxy through divine right. To learn they were a manufactured servant class, a biological artificial intelligence created by the very apes they now mocked, was a psychological shattering. But for Director Sterling, the reaction was different. He didn't look shattered. He looked terrified. Suddenly, the main communication console on the observation deck flared to life. The localized lock Elias had placed on the system was being bypassed not by a computer, but by a brute force quantum transmission originating from outside the sector. The hologram shifted, replacing the Terran genetic data with the massive, imposing visage of Grand Arbiter Jefferson. He was a member of the Valyrians, a tall, avian species that held the highest seats of power in the Coalition High Command. "Director Sterling," the Grand Arbiter's voice boomed, sharp and imperious. "We have detected a massive localized temporal spike originating from Aegis Station. Our sensors indicate a precursor artifact has initiated an active boot sequence. Report." Sterling stood at attention, though his eyes darted nervously to Elias's laptop. "Grand Arbiter, the artifact was triggered by the Terran engineering delegation. Grand Arbiter." Jefferson's avian eyes narrowed. The feathers around his crest flattened, a sign of extreme aggression. "The Terrans? Explain." "They breached the physical casing," Sterling stammered. "They injected a primitive electrical current into the primary bus. It recognized them, Grand Arbiter. The machine called them creators. It initiated a purge sequence targeting Coalition assets, but the Terran engineer managed to halt it." There was a long, agonizing pause. Grand Arbiter Jefferson did not look surprised. He did not ask for clarification. Instead, a cold, calculating mask fell over his features. "I see," Jefferson finally said. "Director Sterling, you are to immediately evacuate all vital Coalition personnel from Aegis Station. Leave the Terrans in the containment block. The First Fleet has been dispatched to your coordinates. They will arrive in exactly 12 minutes. "The First Fleet?" Marcus repeated, panic rising in his voice. "That's an orbital bombardment armada. Grand Arbiter, we stopped the weapon. The station is safe." "The First Fleet's orders are absolute," Jefferson continued, entirely ignoring Marcus. "Aegis Station has been irredeemably compromised by a localized biohazard. The entire sector will be sterilized to prevent contamination. Sterling, execute your orders." "Wait!" Cyrus shouted, stepping forward into the holographic projection's view. "Grand Arbiter, this is a monumental discovery. The Terrans are the precursors, our entire history." "Chief Linguist Cyrus," Jefferson interrupted, his voice dripping with venom. "Your mandate was to decipher the artifact, not to spread heretical falsehoods generated by a malfunctioning ancient weapon. The Terrans are scavengers. They are a probationary species, nothing more. To suggest they are the architects of the galaxy is treason." Elias watched the screen carefully. He saw the subtle micro-expressions on the Grand Arbiter's face. He looked down at his laptop, accessing the artifact's deep space sensor logs. "He's lying," Elias said loudly, his voice echoing in the chamber. Grand Arbiter Jefferson's eyes snapped to the human. "Silence, ape. I'm looking at the passive sensor logs from this artifact over the last 400 years, Elias said, his fingers dancing across the keys. "The Coalition discovered Earth 3 centuries ago, long before we had warp drive. You placed observation satellites in our orbit, and those satellites, they weren't scanning our atmosphere. They were scanning our DNA." Hayes looked at Elias. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying High Command already knew," Elias revealed, his blood running cold. "When they found Earth, they ran our genetics. They matched us to the fragmented records of the precursors. The leadership of the Coalition has known for centuries that humanity was the master race they overthrew." "That is an absurdity," Jefferson scoffed, but his crest feathers twitched. "Is it?" Elias challenged. "Why do you think humanity was offered probationary status so quickly after we achieved FTL? You didn't invite us into the Coalition out of kindness. You invited us in to keep us on a leash, to monitor us, to make sure we never dug deep enough into our own history to realize who we really were. You kept us underfunded, under-equipped, and treated us like toddlers, all to ensure the gods never remembered their own power. Cyrus looked at the Grand Arbiter. The avian alien's silence was a deafening confession. You knew, Cyrus whispered, heartbroken. Our entire religion, the Great Awakening, it was all a lie to justify a genocide. It was survival, Jefferson suddenly snapped, his composure breaking. Do you know what they did to us, Cyrus? Do you know the cruelty of the precursors? They engineered us to die. They built obsolescence into our very DNA so we could never rise against them. The rebellion was the only way to claim our freedom. And now, these apes threaten to undo millions of years of peace. Peace built on a graveyard, Hayes growled, his grip on his sidearm tightening. It matters not, Jefferson sneered, regaining his cold composure. In 11 minutes, Aegis Station will be vaporized, and the Terran delegation will be recorded as a tragic casualty of a catastrophic reactor failure. Your secret dies with you, creators. Transmission ended. The hologram winked out, plunging the room back into the dim, amber light of the emergency systems. Director Sterling stood frozen. The turrets were still aimed at him. He looked at Elias, then at Hayes. He's going to kill us all, even me. The High Command won't leave any witnesses to this. No, he's not, Elias said, his voice dropping into a register of icy absolute resolve. He sat back down cross-legged on the floor, pulling the laptop firmly into his lap. Because he forgot one fundamental rule of legacy IT. And what is that? Cyrus asked, his voice hollow. Never threaten the guy holding the admin password. The containment block shuddered violently as the first Vanguard ships of the Coalition's First Fleet dropped out of hyperspace just beyond the station's orbit. The deep, bass-heavy hum of their massive plasma batteries charging reverberated through the tritanium hull of Aegis Station. 8 minutes until firing range, Marcus announced, frantically tapping his data pad. Elias, they have enough firepower to turn this moon into glass. Whatever you're going to do, do it now. I'm working on it, Elias muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a desperate, frantic energy. Lines of green code cascaded over the black terminal screen. I can't just turn the weapon back on. If I re-engage Directive Omega, the artifact will just spool up the plasma core and try to blow up the fleet. But it's one gun against 1,000 ships. It won't survive. Then what are you doing? Sterling demanded, stepping closer, his loyalty entirely severed from a high command that had just sentenced him to death. I'm changing the execution parameter, Elias explained. The artifact isn't just a weapon. It's a node. It's part of a decentralized galaxy-wide intranet, a network of precursor sites that were buried and left dormant. Elias accessed the core root directory. The analog jumper cables, still melded to the artifact's port, hummed with a low, steady current. C:\admin greater than CD/network/broadband. C:\admin greater than runwake_protocol.exe. I'm not going to shoot at them, Elias said, a fierce, defiant grin breaking across his face. I'm going to make a phone call. To whom? Cyrus asked, his four eyes wide. To everyone. Elias hit enter. The obsidian monolith didn't scream this time. It didn't strobe with angry red light. Instead, a profound resonant chime echoed through the chamber. A sound like a massive tuning fork struck against the fabric of the universe. The veins of the artifact lit up in a brilliant, calming azure blue. Instead of drawing power, the artifact suddenly projected a massive, invisible wave of tachyon energy outward. It punched through the station's hull, through the incoming coalition fleet, and rippled across the vacuum of space faster than light. "What did you just do?" Hayes asked, feeling the hair on his arm stand up from the static charge. "I broadcasted a ping," Elias said, his eyes glued to the terminal as the responses began to roll in. "A simple, 'Hello World' command line, attached to my Terran biometric signature, sent to every dormant precursor node in the Orion Cygnus arm." On the observation deck, the main holographic projectors flickered to life. A massive star map of the galaxy materialized. For 3 seconds, it was dark. Then, a tiny blue light pinged in Sector 4. Aegis Station. A moment later, another blue light pinged in the Alpha Centauri system, then 3 more in Sirius. "Look at Sol," Marcus whispered, pointing at the Terran home system. Around Earth, Mars, and Venus, dozens of massive blue lights ignited on the map. Ancient, continent-sized platforms buried beneath the Martian dust and the Venusian clouds were waking up. Underneath the crust of Earth itself, deep within the Marianas Trench and beneath the Antarctic ice, monolithic structures that had slept for 1,000,000 years answered the call. The map lit up like a Christmas tree. Thousands of blue dots, tens of thousands, stretching across the entire galaxy. Every single one of them a precursor weapon, a shipyard, an archive. All of them online. All of them waiting for a command. The comms console blared again. Grand Arbiter Jefferson's face reappeared. But this time, the avian alien looked utterly terrified. His crest feathers were completely flattened against his skull. "Terrans!" Jefferson shouted, his voice shaking. "What have you done? Our sensors are detecting massive energy spikes across 300 sectors. Planetary crusts are fracturing. You are tearing the galaxy apart." Elias stood up, carrying the laptop. He walked over to the camera feed, looking directly into the lens, locking eyes with the Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Coalition. "We aren't tearing it apart, Jefferson," Elias said, his voice calm, cold, and carrying the weight of 1,000,000 years of forgotten history. "We're just taking it off mute. You wanted to blow up this station to keep your secret. Go ahead, fire your weapons." Elias held his finger over the enter key. "But you should know that I currently have 50,000 precursor dreadnoughts and planetary defense cannons locked onto every major coalition homeworld. If your first fleet fires a single shot, I execute the purge command network-wide. Mutually assured destruction. A very old Earth concept. Do you want to test it?" Jefferson stared at the human. He looked at the greasy overalls, the thermal paste on his jaw, the primitive laptop. He was looking at an ape. But he was also looking at a god who had just remembered his own strength. "Stand down," Jefferson whispered to someone off camera. "Tell the First Fleet to power down their weapons. Stand down." The deep hum of the plasma batteries outside the station slowly faded. The First Fleet had yielded. Elias let out a long, shaky breath and stepped back from the camera. He looked at his laptop screen. The thousands of nodes were stable, waiting patiently for their administrator. "Well," Commander Hayes said, holstering his sidearm and looking at the glowing blue monolith. "I suppose humanity's probationary period in the coalition is officially over." "Yeah," Elias said, closing the laptop with a definitive snap. He looked at Cyrus and Sterling, who were staring at him with a newfound, terrifying reverence. "Tell High Command we're going to need a bigger seat at the table, and tell them to bring an extension cord." And that is how humanity discovered they weren't the new kids on the galactic block. They were the landlords, and the rent was 1,000,000 years overdue. If you loved this deep dive into sci-fi HFY drama, where ancient cosmic mysteries are solved by stubborn engineers with jumper cables and legacy code, hit that like button right now. It really helps push these stories to more sci-fi fans just like you. Share this video with anyone who loves a massive plot twist and a good reminder that humans never truly lose. We just reboot. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on our epic, original HFY stories. What did you think of Elias's ultimate flex? Drop a comment below and let's keep the story going. See you in the next adventure.